para serem lidas solitariamente, certo? Esse site ele já foi acessado por milhões de internautas de todo o mundo. Existe um programa ali muito bem organizado por orientandos do Harvey que cuidam da legendagem para diversas línguas dessas aulas, de tal forma que esse curso está disponível. Esse curso é a base do texto de Para Entender o Capital, os 2 volumes. Lançamos esse ano o primeiro volume sobre o livro 1 do Capital, e no ano que vem vamos lançar o volume 2. Mas esse curso está, portanto, disponível, assim como diversas conferências publicadas em YouTube e também textos escritos pelo Harvey publicados. Vocês podem encontrar isso também no nosso blog, daboitempo.com.br, no nosso site. Então, fica esse convite, sem esquecer também o texto que tem no Cidades Rebeldes. Então, no fim, eu repito o serviço geral, mas existe sim, o Harvey tem essa preocupação de tornar acessível. A própria escrita é acessível e o trabalho é árduo. Bom, passando para a primeira leva de questões, David, temos aqui algumas questões. Agora temos algumas questões, primeiro, voltadas à questão urbana. Gostaria de solicitar-lhe a gentileza de discorrer um pouco sobre o tema da... Agora você está ouvindo? Ok. Tocando em questões urbanas, se você poderia fazer um comentário sobre o processo de gentrificação, assim como o processo de remoções em áreas de moradia popular, para, enfim, os mais diversos fins. Da mesma forma, há também aqui uma questão sobre o que, no seu entendimento, os urbanistas contemporâneos podem fazer para atuar em projetos urbanos nas cidades e se comunicar com os cidadãos em geral. Então, essa é uma primeira leva de questões. Enquanto você responde, eu vou organizando aqui mais questões.
I'll go back to my Baltimore housing experience and tell you a little story about that. One of the theses that comes out from reading a text by Engels on the housing question, Engels has a very neat formulation. He says, the bourgeoisie has only one answer to the housing question. It moves it around. That is, it revitalizes a neighborhood with great ceremony from officialdom, while the poverty reappears somewhere else. So this thesis of moving the problem around was something that I used a lot in the housing discussions in Baltimore. And a couple of years after the initial discussions, we had a big meeting on what to do. And at that time, some of the people in the city decided I was obviously a leftist and therefore needed to be attacked. So I gave a talk about moving the problem around in Baltimore, and the leftists or the right-wing, some right-wing people in the room started attacking me. But we had invited somebody from the Chase Manhattan Bank in New York to talk about the experience of New York. So I found myself being defended by the head of the Chase Manhattan Bank, who kind of said, we have spent a lot of work and time trying to deal with the housing question in New York City, but we find after we've done the work, the same people are no longer living there. So this question of moving around is actually very critical. And unless we can deal with that, we will never solve the problems of the society. He thought it was such an interesting idea, he asked me where I got it from, which is not a good idea. So I told him I got it from Engels, but he thought he was a professor at Harvard. And it was so funny, I had to at some point or other to say, no, actually he was a collaborator of Karl Marx, and he looked very shocked. This, when a low-income population lives on high-value land, it is always going to be targeted somehow or other. It can be targeted either by buying out, just simply house by house, whatever. It can be targeted through mega projects which move in. The history of displacements around Olympic Games and things like that is every single Olympic Games has been colored by the way in which the displacements have gone on. And of course, you never displace the very rich, you displace the most vulnerable populations. So this is the way in which land rent works in the city. That when rents rise because of an advantageous location or because of new public investments, then the whole composition of the area tends to change. The only way you can prevent this in any foundational way is to have non-market housing. That is, market that cannot pass into the market system. There are various ways of doing that. Public housing, of course, is one of them, but as we saw with Margaret Thatcher, it's always possible to sell that off at a certain point. There are various legal systems that allow people to have non-market housing. Actually, a surprising number of them exist in the United States. I won't go through what they are, but there are many of them. And they can be used. So the big question is how to develop a political movement which is going to use these legal apparatuses which take housing out of being a commodity and turn it into a common good, or a public asset, or a common good. I'd rather it was a common good than a public asset. For example, there's an organization in New York City called Picture the Homeless that is really trying to set up alternative legal structures. But in order to do that, it needs, first of all, to get access to the land, access to the properties. And for this, you need state assistance. And of course, when you have a billionaire who is the mayor of the city, he's not going to do it. They're not going to help at all. We've just elected a new mayor who is talking about social inequality. Maybe, just maybe, he might do something. But that then takes a social organization of some kind to resist the commodification of housing. And it's always difficult. If you set up what, again, one form was called a limited equity co-op, in which you were not entitled to sell at market rents and market rates. At a certain point, people look at a situation and they're living in an accommodation that if they move out, they could get, I don't know, $100,000 for it, but if it went on the free market, they could get $500,000 for it. And at a certain point, the temptation is always there to go for the market result. So this is a big social problem. How to curb speculation in housing markets. how to prevent that speculation getting out of hand, and how to prevent it displacing, either through coercion or through consent, low-income populations from advantageous locations. Right now in New York City, Manhattan, the whole of the island of Manhattan, has become, in effect, a gated community for the rich. With the result that many of the working people who are essential in terms of providing basic services to the city have to live way, way, way out. Well, I'm not telling you anything you don't know in Rio when I say that. But this is going on in London, it's going on in Paris, it's going on everywhere. And again, it comes back to this idea of, well, basically we should be trying to stop housing being viewed as an exchange value and as a commodity, and really start to think about cities which are constructed around use values of housing as a human right rather than as a commodity.
David Harvey. Em diversas conferências e entrevistas, você menciona que algo de distinto que marca em comum as diversas manifestações que temos testemunhado desde 2011 é a ausência de ideias anticapitalistas novas. Nós temos, inclusive, uma ausência sistêmica da palavra socialismo ou comunismo. Vivendo em tempos talvez mais anticomunistas do que na Guerra Fria, você acredita que ainda é possível uma democracia participativa? Te parece possível romper com a separação entre o Estado e a sociedade civil sem o desvanecimento do Estado? Qual a sua impressão, sua opinião sobre o motivo pelo qual não surgem ideias novas no marco destas manifestações?
Actually, if I said there are no new ideas, I misspoke, because there are a lot of new ideas around. The difficulty is that many of them are not, it seems to me, able to confront the nature of the capitalist beast. That these new ideas are sometimes to engage in practices which maybe can help democratize to some degree, and there are small reforms which can occur. Just give you an example which has spread around the world from Brazil, which is the idea of participatory budgeting. Now, if you look at the history of that, first off, it's never been about the budget as a whole. It's always only ever been about a small percentage of the budget. Maybe 15% at most of the budget goes through the participatory practices. Secondly, it seems to give the idea that there is some sort of collective control over what is happening in the city, when in fact it often gives a discretionary to something that is a discretionary component to what is already happening anyway. So I'm not against participatory budgeting because it involves citizens in decision making, it brings people together and the like, it has a social and a political function. But I don't think participatory budgeting can provide the answer to developing a non-capitalist city. And I don't think that any city here in Brazil has managed to become a non-capitalist city through participatory budgeting. And we have a considerable interest now in New York City in participatory budgeting, and I'm supportive of it. But at the same time, I'm saying, look, this is a good thing to do, but it's something that has to change into something else if we're really going to get a hold on what is happening in the city in general, which is effectively defined in the New York case by the real estate board and the construction interests and the big financiers, and they have a tremendous influence in city government. So I think that there are new ideas, but they're not sort of oriented, it seems to me, as part of a general sort of anti-capitalist project, which is, I think, what I would be primarily interested in trying to encourage. I think the other thing I would want to say is that some of these new ideas are very small scale. There's a tendency right now to kind of, for the left, to take micro approaches. It's what I call a sort of a termite approach to politics. You put yourself and you hope that by gnawing away at the structures, eventually the whole structure of capitalism will fall down. And I'm not against what I call termite politics. But again, I think that at some point or other you have to have some idea of what it is you're going to put in its place. I'm personally convinced that one of the difficulties on the left has been to adapt to a situation in which the focus of struggle is no longer the workplace. It has to be the city as a whole, which includes the workplace. The left historically has always defined the proletariat as the factory worker. Well, in the United States, factory work, a lot of it has disappeared. And then the left kind of says the proletariat's disappeared, therefore we have no agent that's going to create history. And you say, well, my definition of the proletariat is everybody who is engaged in the processes of production and reproduction of urban life.